We're in a summer series called Influencers, which is, I guess it's really about the way we use who we are and what we have to affect the people around us. And all of us have gifts, we have resources, we have abilities, and all of us affect a group of people around us. Those generally who are close to us, that may just be a handful. For others, it may be a kind of a wider a network of people. And today we are thinking about how we can influence others through counsel, through advice, through faithful sharing of truth with those around us. And to do that, we are in the book of Esther, which is a remarkable story, a truly wonderful story. It is a true story, but it has so many of the features that we expect in any classic. It has a villain. It has an incredible heroine. It has jeopardy and drama. It has cliffhangers. It has moments where you hold your breath, all of them building to this final act where everything comes kind of into an incredible conclusion. And we landed right in the middle. So I'm going to give you the outline of the story. So if you've never heard this story before, don't worry. I wish we had more time because it is one of the most beautiful stories in the whole of the Old Testament. We are in Susa, which is the capital city of the vast Persian Empire, of an incredibly powerful empire under the control at the moment of a king named Xerxes. The people of God, the Jewish nation, have been conquered by this far larger empire. And like many occupying nations, they came in and they took many people away. They exiled them. They took them back into the kingdom of Persia to the capital city of Susa. And so we're now at a point where many are still in exile, away from home in Susa. A small handful have been allowed back to the home city of Jerusalem. Now, in Susa, there is a man named Mordecai, and he has a young cousin called Esther, who he's brought up like a daughter. And through a remarkable series of events, Esther becomes queen. She is effectively the most significant woman in the Persian Empire, and she is Jewish. But one of the king's officials, named Haman, gets a promotion. And what marks Haman out is that he hates Mordecai. And more broadly than that, he hates all of the Jewish people. And he has a plan that he comes up with to eradicate them as a nation. He manages to convince the king that they present a terrible threat to him and the whole of the Persian Empire. And at the end of chapter 3, the king signs an edict, a rule, an order. And the order says this, chapter 3, verse 13. It is an order as dispatches are sent out to the whole of the provinces to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, women and children, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. As you can imagine, the news is devastating to Jews across the Persian Empire, including Mordecai. And he sends news up to Queen Esther in the palace, which brings us to chapter 4 that we read. And Esther, of course, is deeply distressed as well. These are her people, and this includes her as well. But Mordecai doesn't just give her news, he shares a plan. He gives her counsel. He gives her advice. And here's what he says in verse 8. This is the plan. He gets a copy of the text of the edict for the annihilation, which had been published in Susa. He gets it to Esther and explains to her and told him, this is the messenger, to instruct Esther to go into the king's presence, to beg for mercy, and to plead with him for her people. So it's a simple plan. Esther will use her position as queen to gain access to the king. And when she's in the presence of the king, she will plead for mercy on behalf of her people to explain to the king how he's been manipulated by Haman. But here is the problem. You can only see the king, even if you're queen, if you are summoned. If he extends his golden scepter and calls you in. And here is the problem, says Esther. It's been 30 days since he called me. I've just not been in his presence. And the clock is ticking. But Mordecai comes back with a crucial response. It's probably if you're familiar with Esther, it's probably the most famous verse in the book of Esther. And it will take us into where we'll spend time today. Here it is, verse 12 of chapter 4. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you've come to your royal position for such a time as this. See, as dangerous as this is for Esther, and it is extremely dangerous, unless she can persuade the king, all the Jewish nation will die. There is no other option. And so she gets the message, and we hear her response, a remarkable response. Verse 15. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai, Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it's against the law, and if I perish, I perish. And it sets up the whole dramatic crux of the book. What will happen? What will happen to Esther? To Mordecai? What will happen to the Jewish race? You have to go away and read this. You have to go away and read this. But I do need to tell you how it finishes. It finishes with an incredible outcome that sees the Jewish nation preserved. That sees justice done. But it all hinges on this single suggestion from Mordecai. The plan, his influence, his counsel, his advice is the hinge of the story, and it's what brings salvation. Now, here is a temptation today, is to look at Mordecai and to see what he says, to notice some things about what he says, to try and pull out some lessons about giving wise counsel. But here is the problem with that. Good and wise counsel is not universal. You see, the ability to apply truth into our own lives and in the lives of other people is spoken of generally in the Bible. And so every Christian is called to do that for one another. And so in that sense, all of us do give counsel. But wisdom, discernment, is also a specific and a unique gift. And not everyone has it in equal measure. Can I put this really bluntly? Some people are not great counselors. Some people do not give good advice. Now, here's the even harder thing. Some good and faithful people do not make good counselors. Not everyone is Mordecai. And not all of us will be able to give the kind of counsel that he offers. But embedded down in the counsel of Mordecai is a principle all of us can apply. It's a principle that if we understand it, it will make us the kind of people who can bless, serve, and help others. Esther doesn't work by showing us individuals that we can copy. It's really not about individual characters at all. It is about a glorious and a shining, beautiful truth. And if we can see this one central truth, if we learn to be the kind of people who live by it and share it with other people, then then we can be people of influence. Then we can offer the single piece of counsel that will help others regardless of our own gifts in the area. So let's take a look at this together, shall we? Let's look at what Mordecai's counsel reveals to us, why we need it, and then how we share it. Okay, here's what his counsel reveals. First thing, there is a reason chapter 4 is the most famous in the book of Esther. And a reason that his counsel, his words, are so famous in verse 14. It's the key to the whole book. Because Esther is all about the doctrine of providence. Providence. When you understand providence, you will see how this gem of a book sparkles. More, actually. You find that the doctrine of providence is central to understanding God, is central to understanding yourself, and is central to a life that makes sense for you, and a life that can make sense as you help those around you. Maybe you say, how can that be? Because I've never even heard of it. I don't know what providence is. Let me tell you. Here's what providence is. It's the belief that God is at work, ruling and reigning in every detail and every circumstance for the good of his people. I'm going to say that again because I've just got goosebumps. Providence is the belief that God is at work, ruling and reigning in every detail and every circumstance in life for the good of his people. Here's what it is. It's really a way of saying, in God's world, there is no such thing as chance. There is no such thing as impersonal fate. That God is active and present in working out his plans in the mess of life. Listen again to verse 14. Listen to what he says. For if you remain silent, at this time relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you've come to your royal position for such a time as this? What is Mordecai saying? He's saying this, and his words are informed by an absolute conviction that God is working. See, Mordecai was a devout Jewish man. He knew the Old Testament scriptures. He knew that there was a God who had promised to save a people, to love, to save, redeem a people. And even though right now they are facing one of the greatest threats they've ever known, Mordecai says all of that still remains. There is a God who is still at work to follow through on his promises. And you say, well, how can he talk that way? How can he know that? There are two foundations that providence sits on. Providence relies on the sovereignty of God and the character of God. See, what do I mean? Mordecai believes that this is not too hard for God. He says, doesn't he? He says, if not this plan, then God will work in some other way. Deliverance will come from somewhere else. You can only say that if you believe God is sovereign. Only if you know he's in complete control. Only if you know he has absolute power in every situation, even ones we think are impossible. It is a knowledge that God is all-powerful. But that isn't enough for providence to work. Because God could be all-powerful, but completely disinterested. Just not concerned. But providence isn't just about the absolute power and sovereignty of God. It's about the character of God as well. Providence shows you that yes, God is all-powerful, but also that he's all good. And that he is acting in history to bring about the good. That's why Mordecai says to Esther, God may have put you here to save his people, but if not, he's still the God who's promised to save and deliver. So if it's not through this way, it will be through another way. In other words, and if we can learn this, it will change us. He says, I may not understand his ways, but I know his character. I may not know how all of these things will work out, but I do know what he's like. See, there is something so powerful about reading the book of Esther. So much of it doesn't make sense as you read it. You keep thinking, this is terrible. And then you think, well, this has just got worse. But then by the end, you have this incredible deliverance, details coming together in a way that you never anticipated. And what kind of effect should that have on you as you read through it? I think probably lots. But here's one of them. It should humble us. A story like the story of Esther humbles us and makes us pause, because we should probably say something like this: maybe I don't have as complete an understanding of life as I like to think. Because you never would anticipate a story like Esther. There's a great Christian author called George MacDonald, and he influenced C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien massively. And he said, when you encounter something that doesn't make sense in life, you really have two options. You can say, here's option one, you can think that God has made a mistake. You can turn around and you can say, God, you've got this wrong. Or he says, as option number two, you can use it as an invite to humility. You can use it as a way, here's how he puts it. He says, everything difficult indicates something more than our theory of life yet embraces. In other words, if we don't understand what God is doing, if a difficulty comes in that your theory of life can't cope with, the issue's with your theory and not with God. That's why if you understand what the book of Esther is showing us, if you understand what lies underneath Mordecai's counsel, it can make you a good counselor too. It's the foundation of a life that can make sense. It's the one thing you need to know for your life. It's the one thing you need to help those around you see. Providence means that God cares. Providence means that God is at work for the good of his people, for the good of you, even when you can't see it, especially when you can't see it. That's an incredible basis to live on. It can give you confidence, security, peace, a kind of trust that can ride out even the hardest of circumstances. See, that's what his counsel reveals. Here's the second thing, why we need it. I think this is really simple, but really vital. We need it because it's really hard to see, and it's even harder to believe. And Esther recognizes this. It's an utterly unique book in the whole of the Bible. Why? Probably some of you know this, because the name of God is never mentioned. You won't find the name of God once in the book of Esther. By contrast, the king's name is mentioned 200 times. God is not mentioned once. Do you know how strange that is in the Bible? There is one other book that doesn't mention the name of God, which is the Song of Songs, and it's a collection of love poetry. Esther is unparalleled in the rest of the Hebrew Bible, and it is so strange, it must be for a reason. It must be. It's deliberate. It isn't like the author of Esther got to the end, read it back and went, whoops. Should probably go back, put the name in a few times. This is by design. Do you know, Jewish scholars summarize the whole book of Esther in a very particular way. They talk about in Hebrew the Hester Panim, which is a play on Esther in Hebrew, and it means the hidden face. That's the name for the book, the hidden face. It shows how the whole book of Esther is summarized. The book is about the hiddenness of God. It is a book that makes you ask, where is God? In its very form, it makes you ask, where is God? What on earth is happening here? See, Esther shows us that seeing God at work has always been hard. When life seems to be careering out of control, it is incredibly hard. And I think there's a way that it's particularly hard for us. See, if you go back and read Christian authors from the past, if you go back and spend time, they seem to have a deeper sense of God's involvement in the world. They speak of God's hand at work in a way that we just don't seem to now. I think there's lots and lots of reasons for that. But one of the reasons is that we live in a deeply secular age. An age where we have done away with the concept of the supernatural, and Western culture where we live is of flesh and blood. Everything has a flesh and blood answer. It's been drained of the supernatural. And that affects us. In a world that has little space for the spiritual, we forget God and we forget his presence. We're quick to give everything a rational meaning. We have a culture that makes us blind to God and his ways. And that means Esther is a gift to us because it reminds us that God is at work. But it does it in a way that reflects how life feels. That God's ways so often seem to be hidden. I hope that comes as a comfort to you this afternoon. And if it resonates in any way, shape, or form, please go and read the book of Esther. Go spend time in it. Reflect on what's been shown to you. Life seems like a story where we struggle to find him, and so we need to be shown the reality that he's present and active, and that is exactly what the words of Mordecai draw us into. See, his counsel reveals it's why we need, but here's the last thing. How do we share this? You'll often hear people at the front here at Christchurch saying that our lives are like a story. Which is interesting, isn't it? Because a story, by its very nature, has things that we don't know and we can't see. And the point is that by moving through the story, you discover what happens. Now, the thing about any book, and the book of Esther is no exception, you can find out the ending very quickly. You can get to the end of Esther in about 10 minutes when you get home, and you can find the ending. But if it's true that what people say from the front, that our life is a story, oh, that's not so easy, is it? Because how do you find out how it finishes? You don't know the end. It is so much harder when you live in the mess and the mystery. I was thinking of a part in Lord of the Rings where Sam is speaking to Frodo at one of the darkest points just before they enter Mordor, and he imagines if one day their story will be like one of the great stories of the past. He says, do you think one day children will talk about Frodo and the ring? And he wonders what kind of story it is that they're in, and Frodo turns to him and he essentially says, I'm paraphrasing, you don't know what kind of story it is, Sam, until you get to the end. But when you're in the middle, you just don't know. You can't tell. But that's our question, isn't it? We are in the middle. We live in the middle. And how do we find out midway through the story? How do we live in the middle of the story? Maybe you're asking, how can I be certain that God is at work in the unseen of my life, in all the twists and the turns? It's fine for Esther, yeah, even with all the stuff about the hiddenness, even with all the literary stuff that you're speaking about. But I do not know the end of my story in a way that I see the end of Esther's story. So how can I be certain? I want to believe that, but I'm struggling. Well, listen, Frodo is right. Frodo is right. It's hard to tell in the middle of a story how it will end, but he's wrong. He's wrong when it comes to the story of the gospel. The truth is that every Christian has been drawn into the glorious and true story of the gospel. And the gospel is a story where the ending has been revealed already. The ending, not just that may be, but the ending that will be. What do I mean? Well, here is what the Bible teaches from beginning to end. It is a narrative that unfolds and reaches its climax in Jesus. And through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, he comes and brings salvation to this broken, messy, twisted world. We are rescued from the only enemy with the power to truly defeat us, which is sin. But this story is not finished there, because the story declares that Jesus will one day return, and when he does, all things will be resolved. All loose ends will be tied up, all questions answered, all things will be made new. And do you see, this helps us live in the confused middle. It helps us because it tells us the end of the story, not in every detail. This won't tell you if you'll get the job, how the test results will go, when the suffering will end, but it will tell you the final end, that Jesus will return, that life in glory will suffice for the healing of all wounds and the answering of all questions, and that can change everything in the here and now. See, when you know God's love in Jesus, when you rest secure in this love, when you know this gospel story, then your own life can turn in all kinds of directions, and yet you can still live with confidence, because nothing can diminish or dim his love for you. But you have to find your root, you have to find your hope in this true and glorious story. You have to remember that in Jesus, even when your life does not make sense, there is a hope that has dawned, a truth that is broken in, that secures you not just in the present, or secures you in the present because it's secured your future, finally and decisively. And it's there that God will make you a person of poise and substance. And it's there that you can become helpful to others as well. Because maybe you're saying, hold on, I thought this was about how I helped other people, how I help others see that God is in control. But you're just talking about me believing. I know. But don't you see, that may be the most powerful thing you can possibly do. The very best way I think we can share this with others is as we live it with conviction ourselves. This is part of the power of Mordecai's counsel here. He doesn't just share an amazing plan. He lives displaying a conviction that drives him. He lives out his life as someone who really believes there is a God, and this God is good, and this God is at work, that he has a power, and his power will be revealed. And that, in turn, has a power for others as they look on. Yes, of course we use words. Yeah, of course we help others by encouraging them to see the providence and the work of God in their own lives. There is a sacred privilege to lovingly sit down with somebody else and help say, I wonder how God might be working right now in you, in this, in our lives together. But what if the greatest counsel we could ever give to someone was to simply live our lives in quiet hope? To live with a steady confidence in the character and faithfulness of God, even when life appears to be falling to pieces. Maybe you say, I don't think I've ever come up with a good plan in my entire life. I don't think anyone would want to sit down with me and seek my advice. Do you know, it really doesn't matter. if the one thing that will truly make you helpful to those around you, the one piece of counsel that will really make the difference, is you living out that quiet faith and hope in a God who is good, that will truly make you a person of influence. And let me end with this one last thing. I can't not mention this. If you're not a Christian, maybe you're just not sure you can believe any of this, but I wonder if there's something in this message of Esther. Esther is telling us that God works in unseen ways through tiny details, in the ordinary and the mundane. So let me ask you, when it comes to you waiting for God to do something in your life, what exactly are you waiting for? What do you think God is going to do to show you that he's real? A divine intervention, perhaps? A dramatic miracle? A sign in the sky? You know, he can do all of those things. But if what we're seeing through the book of Esther is true, isn't it far more likely that he would draw you to himself through an ordinary series of events? Maybe through an ordinary week, to an ordinary Sunday, to an ordinary church, where you might hear an ordinary person telling you an extraordinary message about the hope of Jesus. What if everything has built to you being here today? What if it is for such a time as this that you're here? To come and know this God in his power and his character as he's shown himself in Jesus.